what's the title of today's podcast, Tara? What are we talking about?
We're talking about all things meatballs. And by meatballs, we mean meatballs with meat and meatless meatballs.
This is a really good topic. And by the way, Tara, do you feel that it's so much easier to do number 2? Because we're filming 2 in one day now.
Excuse me? You might want to rephrase that.
Do you feel that filming our second episode, because we filmed two in a day, is much, much easier and laid back than the first one?
Yeah. I mean, we've already got like a good flow going, you know.
Yeah. Your voice is warmed up.
For sure.
I mean, I got to warm up my voice again. Tara's voice, guys, is so much better than mine. She has like the most awesome sounding, like just great voice for a podcast.
I've never liked my voice ever. So to hear somebody say that, or to hear our listeners say that, I'm a little shocked and flattered.
So I was reading some viewer comments. There was a comment on the first podcast episode, and they were saying that like I think tone improved towards the end. Maybe like they thought I was a little stiff in the beginning and not as vocally warmed up until the end, which I actually can get behind. They're probably right. It's very hard to just go right when something clips on. Like I watch Tim Dillon, like, you know how I love his podcast. He's hysterical, fellow Long Islander. And a lot of people, you think I sound similar to him, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Your tone and...
Yeah, he's a little younger than us. I think he's like in his late 30s. Right when he starts his podcast, he's like I love if he puts the shades on. By the way, guys, you know why does anybody know why he wears the shades? I'll give you 10 seconds to come up with an answer, and maybe let's see if Tara can answer it. Why does he have shades on?
I have no idea. He doesn't want people to see his eyes when he's
he's got a screen in
something?
back. He's got a screen in back and a camera that's doing all the things they're going to talk about.
Okay, so like his talking points?
Yeah, and if he has to read a script, he doesn't want to, those are like the glass shades that, so you can't see his eyes.
Okay.
Or he's just like wearing shades for some reason, but I think that's probably what it is. Anyway, enough about him. There are other podcasts I listen to as well. I think I said Lex Freeman in the last one. I like the PBD podcast, Patrick Bet David. But I listen to a lot of them. I like to listen to random podcasts, which I hope maybe you're listening to a random podcast today and you just found the Sip and Feast podcast. By this point, this is number 4. Apple will probably have us on the top of the charts. We'll probably be like right up there with the Joe Rogan Experience.
Yeah, sure. Just keep putting that out there to the universe and maybe that'll happen.
Hey, whatever you do put out to the universe becomes reality.
Yeah.
I'm not kidding about
that.
They wrote a book about this when Tara and I were relatively young, shortly after college. It was a book called The Secret. And there were 2 schools of people. One who thought The Secret was the most amazing gift they ever heard in their life, and other people who thought it was a bunch of BS. So I was very indifferent towards The Secret when that came out. How were you at that point with that book?
I was indifferent to it, but later, probably like fast forward 10 years or so, a friend of mine got me interested in listening to Earl Nightingale's The Strangest Secret, which I don't know if The Secret is kind of piggybacking off of Earl Nightingale's audio recording of The Strangest Secret, but basically what he talks about is we become what we think about. So I think the two were somewhat related.
I think they all piggyback. The one I always remember was As a Man Thinketh by I forget the author's name. It's a little book, tiny little book.
You have it.
I love it. I keep it by my bedside table.
Yeah.
I used to use all those motivational books for trading. For my former career, I talked about this in the first episode, but this is episode 4. In case you're wondering, I traded stocks for 14 years, maybe a little bit longer than that. And it was just my life was just overrun by the financial markets. I traded stocks and futures. I was like a encyclopedia. I knew every single symbol. I knew the support and resistance of each one. I knew which market makers. This is when market makers were important. I knew every single thing about these stocks. And I always struggled with my discipline. You always want to cut your losers quickly and let your winners run when you trade. This is a principle that still works to this day. But I was always, my discipline was always off. So I would always have that book, As a Man Thinketh, next to me. It was like my motivation. Now, I read that book along with probably another 100 motivational books back then. So I was kind of an expert on motivational books before motivational like YouTubers even existed. Now these motivational YouTubers are everywhere, you know, and I don't even really consume that type of content anymore because it's a part of me. I don't need it anymore. All right, so that's a tangent. We always start with a tangent, by the way.
Story of our life.
What are we talking about again today? Bring me back to center. Bring me back to true north, Tara.
We're going to talk about meatballs because they're pretty, I would say spaghetti and meatballs specifically is kind of the iconic Italian-American dish. I think a lot of times when you picture an Italian restaurant in the U.S., you think of like white and red checkered tablecloth top, maybe a cheap bottle of Chianti, and a big old bowl of spaghetti and meatballs. So not going to talk about the spaghetti. Let's talk about the meatballs. There's a lot to talk about. I think the first question, or the burning question, what is the best way to make meatballs?
Okay.
Because there's a variety of different ways you can do it.
So I'm gonna answer the question immediately, but then we'll obviously I could spend 24 hours. I could do a 24-hour podcast marathon talking about meatballs. There is no perfect way to make a meatball. Like, there's no mystical meatball and then all other meatballs fall by the wayside to that meatball. It depends what type of meatball mood you're in.
I'm just laughing because the meatball mood, I don't know. It just made me chuckle.
How's my face? All right?
Yeah, you're good.
All right. I always ask Tara how my face is because, it's for the video viewers. Need to look perfect for you guys. So, Tara laughs at my jokes, which I really appreciate.
I sometimes laugh to just keep from crying.
Yeah, just it's like a cringy laugh. Like she's like, "Oh God, how much longer? How much longer?" So anyway, yeah, let's bring it back to the meatballs. There is no perfect meatball, but I have ideas of what will make a meatball better, and there's ways to go about it. There's certain techniques that are really important. These are very much taken for granted by people that have been making meatballs forever. And then when somebody who's a novice, maybe you're a new cook, maybe you're a longtime cook, but maybe you're not like, you don't do too many meatballs. These things might be a little, what's the right word? Maybe a revelation to you. So I'm going to ask Tara if she knows some of those secrets. Well, do you know any of the ones I'm talking about?
Secrets to making meatballs?
Like to make a better meatball.
I would say maybe it comes down to not over kneading the meat mixture.
Overmixing it, yeah.
Overmixing, because then they can become tough. I think the way in which you prepare them before you add them to the sauce makes a difference. If it's baked versus fried.
Let's forget about the cooking then. So, let's talk about the actual, just what's in them.
So when you're asking me about tricks that I would know of, okay, so all right, let's go back to that. So maybe the moisture level.
Definitely.
So like adding like a grated onion.
Grated onion works, but what else is really important moisture-wise?
Milk?
Milk, definitely.
Anything else?
So those are really important.
Did I pass your quiz?
Yeah, no, you basically, if you know those two things, like you're pretty much on the right track. Then there's some other tricks, like we put ricotta in the most recent batch we did.
Yeah,
those are nice. It's the bread you use, how much bread you use. Obviously, if you use too much bread, but you got to play with it because you might be trying to make extend meatballs for a family, and so if you start with a certain amount of meat and the recipe might say like only use 1 cup of breadcrumbs per 3 cups of meat. You might be like, oh, well, if I just do 2 cups of breadcrumbs, I can get so much more for my family. So maybe you do that. Maybe you make that executive decision. You go for that. There's nothing wrong with that. Like you can 100% do it. If you don't have enough money, you can just do a bread meatball, which we got a recipe on. That's just polpette di panna. That's it.
Right. That's right.
It's a bread meatball. So what you can do there is when you say you're making chicken cutlets and you have the leftover egg and breadcrumbs, you could turn them into little meatballs. You could add a little bit more cheese in there, Or you can just do a full recipe of the bread meatballs, which I love. Whenever we put them up, like we share them on Facebook or whatnot, people are like, "Where's the meat?" And we're
they're like, "I don't see any meat."
Yeah,
in
they're
this
like, "I think you
recipe."
messed up the recipe. There's no meat." I'm like, "No, that is the recipe."
That is the recipe. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's cucina povera, which means like poor man's food.
Yeah.
So it's a poor man's meatball.
Which was probably very common in Italy, but less common in America, because when the poor Italians moved to America, they had plentiful amount of meat.
That's right.
So it was kind of like not as important, I guess, to make those breadless meatballs anymore. But we put them on there almost out of tradition. When we put it up a few times, they do really well.
Yeah,
People are like, "Oh, I remember this,"
They did really well during Lent specifically.
Yeah.
People who observe are not eating meat on Fridays.
So yeah, though, we're talking about how to get a meatball better, and Tara really did hit it. A grated onion works well, but one thing that she didn't talk about, which is important, is the actual meat and the fat content of the meat you're using. So you can do everything right, but if you start with like 95% lean meat, you're not going to get the same results as if you use 80-20. You could even buy like 75-25. So just have a very large portion of fat in there. And then pork too, the pork you use. It could be a leaner pork. It could be a more fatty pork. These will all affect your final outcome. You could even go, if you want to get really fancy, you could do a short rib meatball. So now the short ribs have a ton of fat inside of them. So you're going to get like a really glorious, fattening, delicious meatball. And then you're getting into like very high-end, almost high-end dining territory where a restaurant will charge you $40 for that, or $50. You're getting a short rib meatball.
Since you already started to talk about it, this is a question that I was going to ask, and actually one of our listeners sent it in. They're curious about the blend of meat. Is it better to just stick with one type of, like, should you just use all beef, or should you just use all pork, or should you do a blend?
So I'm a sucker for definitely a beef and pork meatball. I don't really use veal anymore. Tara doesn't eat veal, so we've like kind of made it a thing in the family where we don't use where we don't use veal anymore. So with certain exceptions, like I did do ossobuco recently. That's on the site.
Yeah.
And I obviously used the veal shanks for that. And, I got to get a couple more veal recipes on the site, probably veal and peppers. Trying to think of some traditional ones. A lot of veal dishes, though, you could just do chicken with. So that's what I normally have pushed on the site. So as far as like, obviously old school places will still sell their meatball mix, and that meatball mix will consist of 1/3 beef, 1/3 pork, 1/3 veal. The beef will typically be probably 90-10 more so than 80-20. My favorite way to go about it is just to get 80-20 beef, 80-20 chuck, and then get a nice looking pork. Not too lean. You start with that, you go from there, you're going to get a good meatball, unless you do something really bad to it.
So your recommendation is to do a blend.
Definitely, unless you can't, some people can't have pork, so you just don't eat the pork.
That's right.
So you do a beef meatball. Some people might want to just do a pork meatball.
What are your thoughts on turkey meatballs?
So we have a turkey meatball on our site, and actually we have a few. We did turkey meatballs for the wedding soup. And then we have bigger turkey meatballs. And the way that we made these turkey meatballs better was to add a lot of moisture into them. Before I go even into that, you can also use better turkey. So turkey will be sold either all the white meat, and then it'll be a mix with the dark meat.
Yeah.
And you really want to buy the dark meat one, like the mixture, because that'll have more fat in it.
Right, and more flavor.
More flavor, too. But we put grated onion in that one, along with the milk. And you're just trying to bring up the moisture content. When you're dealing with that and you're really trying to put a lot of moisture in it, then they get a little harder to roll. They don't hold their shape as well.
That's true.
Yeah. But I think those aren't bad. I mean, the kids like them, but they don't like them as much as they like a regular, beef and pork meatball.
I think they're really good in the Italian wedding soup because you kind of have like a chicken. Do you use chicken stock for that one?
Yeah.
I think. So you've already kind of got like that poultry flavor. So I think the turkey meatballs in that recipe in particular is a nice compliment.
It's funny, like it's great when you have it by itself, but once you compare it to the real one, this is the thing with everything. It's like you order a bowl of gluten-free pasta in a restaurant, and say you're with like a group of 4 people and everybody else is having chicken, so nobody's having another pasta. It's not like you can be like, oh, let me try your regular pasta. And then you go, it's all relative compared to what you're having. Like if you're having that turkey meatball and you did a good job preparing it, it's great. But once you put a good fatty beef and pork meatball against it, it kind of, let's be honest here. Would you agree with me there?
I do. But for people who, for whatever, reason, whether it's health reason or personal choice, they choose to not have, beef, or for religious reasons, maybe they don't have pork. If they're just eating a turkey meatball, they're not going to compare it against another one. So for them, it's good.
And turkey is supposedly more consumed in Italy than it is in America by a long shot. So a lot of the dishes that I do with chicken, like any type of scallopini or whatever, and you're making chicken sorrentino or chicken piccata, you could easily just take a turkey breast and do it too. But we never do that here in America.
Yeah.
You don't even see it on the menu ever.
No, although occasionally I will see turkey for that purpose in Uncle Giuseppe's, because I do think it is. A few times, I do think it is an Italian thing. Yeah.
Like I saw Jacques Pepin prepare like a cutlet one time with turkey. Like he filleted it and pounded it out. And I was like, oh, that's such a good idea. I'm like, I just never do that.
It is good. I mean, I feel like for Americans, most of the time, if you're consuming turkey, it's like as a cold cut.
That's right. It's the
deli sandwich, turkey.
And let me tell you, Americans consume a massive amount of turkey through cold cuts. So I worked in delis for about 3 years, and we would always, all the places we worked at, we would always pre-cut. This is most delis that get crowded, they do it this way. So you do 1/4 pound of meat for a sandwich, and you do 1/3 of a pound of meat for a hero. Some delis will even do 0.4. And you cut them in advance, then roll them up. And based on the previous weeks, months, years business, we do 30 hams a day, but we do 75 turkeys. We do 25 roast beefs. We do 4 liverwurst. That's exaggerating. Normally it's about 0 liverwurst, and then, you got like all the other ones you do. And, you get that like one guy who comes in, they're like, I will take bologna on a heavily buttered white bread with the crust cut off. It's like, ooh, man, that guy's mom really made him a mean sandwich.
That could tie back to our picky eater episode.
I really digressed there.
That's okay. So we talked about the blend of meat. As far as cooking the meatballs.
Yeah.
Like when we're talking about meatballs here, I think we're talking about the meatballs that you would have with like a Sunday sauce, right? So is there a right or wrong way, or a better or worse way to prepare the meatballs before you dump them into the sauce? What are the different ways that you can prepare them?
This is a great question. This is, I know. You're the best. You're the best. People really debate this one a lot. So one of the first videos I put out a series, maybe like after only 10 videos or so. I did a whole Sunday sauce series. So it had make a huge pot of Sunday sauce. I think I used like 15 cans, 28-ounce cans. So I had like a huge amount of sauce. And then I made 5 dishes with it. I did so the first one was obviously Sunday sauce. Second one was meatballs. Then there was like a braciole. There was like I can't even remember. There was like 5 of them. And they're old videos. They're like, audio's only coming out of 1 a year. Like, people always let me know about that. They're like, I just want to let you know the audio's only coming out of 1 a year. I'm like, I will go back 3.5 years ago and tell my 3.5 years ago self to change the audio. I'm like, I can't do anything about it.
Get your DeLorean.
I'm sorry that I did. My videos weren't really good back then. And we were talking about it like in another episode. I didn't know how to speak to the camera. One of the videos in that series was not breaded. It was baked versus fried meatballs.
That's
so
right.
Those are the two typical ways that most of the way that people will argue about which is better, because they're usually contrast with each other. When you fry a meatball, and you should shallow fry your meatballs, like maybe an inch of oil at the most. Yeah, and it's even debatable whether people say olive oil or vegetable oil. Most Italian Americans will use vegetable oil because frying in olive oil is seen as like, it's a very like uppity, wealthy thing to do. And, you know, again, times change now, and some people would never fry in vegetable oil. We get all the comments. People are like, I can't believe you're using that type of oil. Like, it has this, and this in it. And you can fry your meatballs and they'll get nice and brown, whether you use vegetable or olive oil. Or you can bake them, and baking them will create a different texture. You'll get a huge crust on the fried. On the baked one, you're not going to get much color at all. A little bit moister, I believe, on the baked one. So we did that. We put them both in the sauce, and then the kids, young James, you know, he's like when he's a baby, and Sammy, this is when my daughter used to actually come into my videos, they tried them, and they both said that the baked meatball was the better one.
Yeah.
Now, that's the opinion of two very young kids. I personally am still a sucker for fried. I think nothing beats those crispy parts when you do a good fried meatball. Then obviously there's two other ways to do it. You can broil them. You can, well, actually 5. You can bake then broil, or you can straight broil, or you can put them straight into the sauce, which is a fairly common way to do it. With a lot of old school Italians, they'll just put it right into the sauce. We'll roll those meatballs up. You know, now when you do that, if you're using like a lot of fat, like 80-20 or 75-25, you are putting all of that fat into your sauce.
That's right.
That's the thing.
That's right. But you'd be doing that if you were going to just put ground beef into sauce anyway, right?
But you can strain. Some people are really, really hell-bent on like straining all the fat. It's kind of an oxymoron though. Like if you're, not an oxymoron, that's not the right word. But if you're going to like saute or fry up a bunch of 80-20 ground beef and then remove all the fat, what are you doing? Yeah. Just start with 90-10 then.
That's
like,
right.
You're not like, you know, and again, people don't question this. They're like, well, you know, yeah, that if you're going to take all the fat out of it, don't buy the meat that has the fat in it.
Yeah.
So people will say, oh, well, it retains some of it.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, you and I can agree to disagree because I liked the baked meatball. That was what I preferred. And the reason why I preferred it was because I felt like when it gets fried, the flavor of it was a little too overpowering, or it had a different taste to it. I felt like the baked tasted a little cleaner. I don't even know if that makes sense to anybody who's listening, but that's just the way I'm describing it. And I also preferred the texture of the baked.
I've grown to like the baked now. One of the most popular places in the New York area is in the Long Island area for meatballs, is that place that had the challenge with Bobby Flay years ago in Northport.
Oh, yeah. I don't think...
Is it Menino's, is it called? You know, I'm going to let Tara look it up. I don't want to get this wrong.
I think the gentleman passed away.
He did pass away, yeah. This place baked their meatballs, and they beat Bobby Flay. Maroney, I'm sorry. Maroney.
They're still there.
Yeah, so it's probably the kids.
I don't want to say that he passed away and then I'm wrong.
So this place, while Tara's checking, they would have great meatballs. So they serve most of that like old school Italian American food, and they would give you a pot of your pasta, I believe, and like so they give it to you in a pot, and when you come back, you would bring your pot back. Like that's how it would work.
That's right. And yeah, the gentleman Michael Maroney, who was known for his famous meatballs, he died at the age of 57.
Oh wow.
This was back in 2019.
It's a Northport, Long Island institution. For those of you guys wondering where Northport is, it's basically the center of the island on the North Shore.
Pretty much.
So it's like basically it's the dividing line essentially of Suffolk and Nassau County.
Right.
Tara and I live a little further out, but the island is a very long geographic, just piece of land. You got to drive very far to go from Manhattan to Montauk.
Even from where we are, it takes about over 2 hours.
Yeah, because we have to go south then, and then it gets very narrow where there's only one road to go on. That's why the wealthy people from the city, they take a helicopter to Montauk.
Yeah, or the Hamptons or wherever they're going. Yeah,
the Hamptons. More the Hamptons than Montauk. Montauk used to be a place for people who didn't have a lot of money.
We used to be able to go to Montauk when we were kids. No more.
Not anymore. Everything out there is expensive now. Mm-hmm. And, again, we're a little tangent here, but the North Shore, if you go out, the North Fork is definitely a nicer, more laid back place to go than the South Fork.
Yeah. The North Fork is, there's wineries, there are farms, right? That's kind of what I think the North Fork is known for, and the South is known. While there are beaches on the North Fork, they tend to be rocky. The South Shore is known for their beaches, and of course, Jerry Seinfeld's home and
Jerry Seinfeld,
the Hamptons, and kind of more. It's more glamorous, I think, on the South Shore. The North Shore is, like you said, a little more laid back.
But anyway, yeah, that was just about that place. Maroney is in Northport, and they still to this day they bake their meatballs. I know that for a fact because I watched that episode.
I remember that.
Yeah,
I remember watching that.
And it was a long time ago. The episode. It's thank God Bobby Flay got beat. When you look at Bobby Flay, and you have a stereotypical cocky New Yorker image, he is like. He's the poster child for that. That's his confidence is warranted. He's a great chef.
He's talented.
And he has all these restaurants and
any restaurant of his that I've been to has been great.
Yeah, I've never been to any of his restaurants.
Yeah. Mesa Grill, which isn't there anymore, was one of my favorites. He had a ancho chili pork loin that was out of this world. Pork that loin. I loved.
I feel like pork loins are just it's something I would never order in a restaurant. You know what I mean? Was it a pork loin or a pork tenderloin?
Actually, it was a pork tenderloin. I
was just going to say,
I was
probably
wrong.
A tenderloin.
It was very narrow. It was very delicious. It was cooked like medium, I think. And
he was cooking it medium before medium was allowed.
Exactly. But it was so good. And, he certainly does have a bit of an ego, but like you said, it's warranted.
Let me tell you something about him, okay? His ego's more warranted than Gordon Ramsay. Gordon Ramsay won't even go on one of the competition shows.
Yeah.
Gordon Ramsay has just built himself up to be this guy, but he's never competed against anybody. Mm-hmm. At least Bobby Flay, whether you believe those things are fake or not or whatever, he went on there and he competed against everybody.
Yeah.
He won every episode.
I tip my hat to Bobby Flay. And if he ever wants to be a guest on our podcast, we can have him.
Bobby, you should come on. Come on. We're both from Long Island. Well, he's from Massapequa, I believe.
No. He's actually from New York City. I always thought he was from Long Island.
Okay.
The Baldwins are from Massapequa.
The Baldwins. Oh, Alec Baldwin, if you would like to come on, you're invited too.
Make sure you have an armorist.
Yes.
Is that even the right word?
Yes. Make sure I arm myself. So no, that's another tangent with Bobby Flay.
Yeah. Back to meatballs. You talked about we obviously did the video of the baked versus fried. I don't think we ever tested anything where we just dropped the meatballs right into the sauce. But you told me in the past that did you have an uncle that used to do that?
So it wasn't he's my great uncle. So it was, on my grandmother's side, Uncle Tony, who was my grandmother had a bunch of sisters. So they all had, it was like a huge family of, everybody was Italian, and then everybody died. They're all gone. But I remember when I was young, his meatballs would be with raisins. So, and then he would roll them and put them right in the sauce. So that's very familiar. And so then we have a recipe on the site, just as a Sicilian meatball with the raisins. And it's really common. That's why I put the raisins in the braciole too. A lot of people. We get a lot of comments with that. They're like, I can't, I hate that. I don't know why you did that. They're like, that's horrible. They're like, that's not Italian. And I'm like, it's
Sicilian.
And Neapolitan, I would think too. And, I'm like, it's very much. I'm like, what do you mean it's not Italian?
Yeah.
It's what do you think? I invented that?
Mm-hmm. I personally love the raisins in the braciole. I love raisins and meatballs. I think they add a really great sweetness to them and texture too.
I love them. Now in Sicily, they probably use currants more than raisins.
That's right.
They're the same thing.
That's right.
For all intents and purposes, the exact same thing. You're splitting hairs if you worry about that. You can soak your raisins a little bit. You can soak them in a little bit of warm water, which I should be doing to my throat right now.
Yeah.
So I just ran downstairs and got some hot water because I was saying how I was soaking the raisins in warm water, but I needed to soak my throat. I can't clear my throat the way Tara can. Tara has such a beautiful voice.
I still find that funny.
You do?
Yeah.
You do. Your voice is great. Your voice is you could be a voice actor.
I never liked my voice. Actress. Still don't. But no, I always thought you had a good voice for this. And people like it. And thank God your voice is easy to listen to, because I have to listen to it all day long.
Yeah, you do have to listen to it all day long.
It's all day.
I subject you to Geneva Convention crimes of mass nonstop talking. No, you're always been the quiet one, and I've always been the more talkative.
Your only crime is talking to me before I've had my coffee in the morning. You know, when I walk into the office in the morning, before I even sit down, you're right away going a mile a minute, and I'm like, dude, let me just sit down and take a sip of my coffee before you start in.
You know what?
That's reality.
You know what? You're right.
That's the reality.
You're right. I mean, I'm agreeing with you. So, what were we talking about? What type of meatballs?
Well, you were talking about your Uncle Tony.
Yeah.
right?
So he would do that in the sauce. And again, a lot of people will do it in the sauce. And it's a really nice way to get a really moist meatball. I will often put them in the sauce, or not in the sauce, but I'll put them in like wedding soup or any type of soup where we've done a bunch of different soups with the mini meatballs, and I'll just put them right in. Because what's the point? You're going to put them in the oven for 10 minutes. Sometimes I've done it. If you guys have seen a lot of the videos, you'll notice that sometimes I've done it. Sometimes I do it straight. Another really easy way, to do this, if you want those little meatballs and you don't want to roll 100 of them, you can form a rope. Okay. Kind of like when you're making gnocchi, and then use the same cutter and you can cut them.
Yeah.
Now you can, some places you'll go to, they won't even roll them then into balls. They'll just throw them in like a pillow.
Yeah.
Like those mini pillows.
I think that's a fantastic idea.
Yeah.
It still has the same taste. It's just so much easier for the person making it.
Speed involved. Because if you're like, if you got to do 40 pounds of meat, that's all. You know how many mini meatballs that would be?
Speaking of mini meatballs, isn't there a special lasagna that uses like super tiny meatballs?
Yeah, so a lot of the people here in Long Island will make their lasagna. They'll use big meatballs, break them up into small pieces. Some people will make mini meatballs, but a lot of that is imitating lasagna carnivale from Naples. So it's like a Neapolitan. It's like a famous dish. I looked it up. Correct. Yeah. Please tell me if I'm right or wrong here. But yeah, that's how my grandmother she would always put meatballs. She would make meatballs. Then she would break them up with her fork to do the layers in the lasagna. That's always how she would do it. I've done faster versions where I just make a meat sauce now and then do it.
Well, according to this website, it does hail from Naples.
See, guys, sometimes I know what I'm talking
about. And
it
is a festive version that's eating during Carnivale. Right.
There you go. So a lot of places will do that here. And basically everything that people make here is just what was taken with them from 100 years ago. That's all it is. Anything that's modern in Italy in the last 30 or 40 years is not made here because there's been no immigration. It all just happened.
That's true.
And then it stopped. That's when the country had the doors open, and then they shut the country down.
Although my stepmother, Angie, did immigrate here from Italy in, I don't know when that would have been. She was 9.
So it was probably around 1955, around there.
Yeah, and she came over on a boat.
Yeah. And actually, it's funny. She came over at that point. I actually probably think the neighbor we had in Farmingdale probably came over around that point too.
Yeah.
In an old house we had a guy next door who didn't really speak too much English.
Angelo.
I forget his last name. He was very old when we were there. We were in our 20s. It was like our second house we owned, our late 20s. And he had this garden that took up almost the whole entire yard. And when I mean every vegetable, for you Long Islanders, I'm pinpointing the geography for you, but it was right near where the PC Richards warehouse was in Long Island.
That was our backyard, basically.
It was our backyard. And he cut a hole through the fence.
Yeah.
And the PC Richards warehouse was like 60 feet down. So it was like dug out. Like how they dig out a school. Like every time a school's built, they always dig them out.
I don't know why. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's always a nice hill so kids can go sleigh riding. I digress. But you could have. People get mad when I say that. But you could have went sleigh riding down this hill into PC Richards. But Angelo didn't go sleigh riding. He
had a cornfield.
He grew corn and everything else back there on their property. So he had it all on the hill and then his own yard. But I would always go over there and he would like always have like arugula for me or whatever greens, and he would pick them and then he run them through the salad spinner, and then I would take them home.
Yeah, I remember him half climbing over the fence, and he had like a handful of some type of bean. It was like a long bean or something like that. And
the broad beans,
yeah. He was like waving them over to me, and I went over and I grabbed them. I think I just ate them raw.
He had. I think he grew everything. I mean, it was so. Again, this is like very typical to a lot of you people who are here, and it might be very odd, like the story I'm telling you, but there are so many guys like this in every neighborhood. Like they all have a fig tree and a lemon tree. So of course he had his fig trees, and he would always protect them. When you do that, you put the burlap over them before it gets cold out. Very, very common. And maybe at one point we'll get a fig tree. It's great, but the thing about a fig tree is you got to eat figs. So you got to eat so many figs in a short period of time. It's not like you get like 90 days worth of figs. You just get your harvest.
Is that how it works?
Well, I mean, it's kind of like apples. Same thing, like any type of fruit tree. Like you're not.
So you give them away. Give them away to your neighbors.
Make
and your friends.
Jelly, right?
Yeah.
But not everybody likes figs. It's always like the Italian guy or girl will be like, hey, Tony has all these figs. Some other person will be like, yeah, and it's like the most important thing to them ever. And then they tell to somebody else and they're like, I don't know, I'm not really into figs.
Yeah, I love figs.
Like, is there anything else to this story here? No, that's the whole story.
I love them. They're so good. They're good in salads. That's how I like them. Like to roast them with like honey and gorgonzola.
Yeah, we had a great recipe on the site that Tara is describing.
That's right.
That's what she's describing.
Yep. They're great. So anyway, how did we get here? We were talking about meatballs.
We were talking about meatballs. Somehow we got into this. I don't even know how. Well, bring me back.
Okay. So I know earlier we talked about the polpette di pane, which are the meatless meatballs made from bread, right?
Yes.
Pane is bread in Italian. But there are other types of meatless meatballs, like polpette di melanzana.
Yes.
Right? Which is eggplant.
So we do a very basic version of that, which is a very popular one with, a lot of vegetarian and vegan people still like to try our recipes. And that one, I mash up the eggplant. I peel it, remove the skin, mash it, just soften it with some garlic, some oil, a little salt and pepper. And then you take that mash, basically your eggplant mash, and then you mix it with a bunch of pecorino romano, your herbs, some other stuff, some breadcrumbs. You form a meatball. Now, this is a really basic way to do it. You can get much more complicated. And I just roll them like that. And then you can put them straight in the sauce, or I bake them for like 10 minutes and then put them in the sauce. And then they're ready to go. You get much more complicated. You can roast that eggplant over an open fire, kind of like baba ganoush, the Greek dish. And then you take that puree and then you make your eggplant meatballs, and then they'll be even better. You can also take your polpette di melanzana, and then you could bread them and then deep fry them, which would be great too. These are all ways to make more work for yourself, or you can go with the simple one that we have.
Yeah. I remember when you made that, those were really good. They were like very healthy tasting.
Yeah, really the only bad part in there is the breadcrumbs.
Eggs are a common ingredient, right? For meatballs. Is it possible to make a good meatball without an egg?
I'm sure there is. And I know people who, they have an egg allergy. That's probably the main reason.
Yeah.
Or if they're vegan, I guess.
Well, if they're vegan, they're not going to really be eating meatballs.
I'm so ignorant when it comes to like the vegan culture of like substitutions.
Yeah.
So I just am. But an egg is typically used for meatballs. It's not, it's always used for one reason. It's the binding agent. So it basically glues the meatball together. It prevents it from from falling apart.
Similar to meatloaf too.
That's right. You have to have eggs in that as well.
Yeah.
Now, you should never have eggs in a burger, though some people, like Gordon Ramsay, puts an egg in his burger.
Does he?
I'm not kidding. People are going to think that I'm having it out for Gordon Ramsay tonight. But I saw him make this. It was like a meatloaf, and but he put it on a bun. It was like some video I watched. This is years ago, guys. It might not even be him. It might be some other British guy. Don't quote me on this. He put breadcrumbs, salt, pepper, onions, and eggs in his burger and made it about 2 inches thick. Oh. And like it was like he was having like a burger off.
Sounds like a mouthful.
My favorite way to do a burger is chuck, ground chuck, flatten it out really on the grill, so you have a lot of crust to burger. So you basically you're mostly crust, and then when you flatten it out, you just put your salt on, kind of like how they do it at Shake Shack or what's that other place? Smash Burger. There's no Smash Burgers in Long Island, right?
I think there's one. I think it's in Wantagh.
We had Smash Burger when we lived in Minnesota.
I've noticed that different places, restaurants or food establishments, they like to turn different things into meatballs. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. I mean, like, I always wanted to. I always struggle with, should we do? So if you're an outsider looking at our recipes and looking at the food we make, if you know the food, you're like, oh, he just makes the food that Italian restaurants in New York makes. That's all he does. And you'd be right if you said that. I always want to like venture a little bit further off, but I guess I concerned about the criticism. So like one thing that I wanted to try was to do chicken piccata meatballs, and then like with pasta. So like what I did was I just made the little pieces of chicken and then tossed it with pasta. But I think if you made like a really tender chicken meatball with the capers and everything inside of it, and then really you can do this without pasta for somebody who can't have the gluten, you know, who wants to be a little healthier.
Yeah.
That idea I said can be done with anything. It could be done with chicken marsala, chicken franchise, like whatever you want, chicken pizzaiola, like you do them all. And you basically could turn anything into a meatball. I mean, there's a guy who has a whole YouTube channel that he just turns everything into sausage. Do you know what I'm talking about?
What's the name of that?
Willet sausage. I'm making sausage or something, like, you know, I'm making the sausage. It's like all he does is make sausage. Like he put like shepherd's pie in sausage.
Shepherd's pie meatballs. That sounds really good.
Yeah, I mean, and it would work
in like a brown Guinness gravy.
I know.
Oh, wow.
I'm probably giving somebody else really good ideas now that you're going to steal from me. No, I don't care if anybody steals. Okay. I don't care if anybody takes any idea I have. What I do care about is when people come into comments and say, Jim, you stole Assassin's Pasta from Chef John. I'm like, first of all, Chef John didn't make that up. That was made in Calabria.
You don't even watch Chef John, really.
Everybody has made Assassin's Pasta. Yeah. So I'm like, you know, at least be creative here. You know, if you're going to tell me I stole something from somebody, I would never steal one of the most common recipes. What are you going to come out when I like, you stole spaghetti and meatballs from Chef Bill? Like, it's like, no, I'm just making what everybody else makes.
Yeah, you're providing instruction in a different way to make a well-known recipe.
Assassin's Pasta is well-known. It's been well-known for about 10 years now in America, probably longer. It's not like it's some secret. I think people who aren't that well-versed in it, when they see something new, they think then that that person created it, but they don't realize that there is no new ideas. There's nothing new under the sun when it comes to food. Everything has been done before.
That is true. Did you talk about fresh breadcrumbs versus store-bought?
Yeah, so we'll do a little bit. So, you know, Tara's asking about fresh breadcrumbs store-bought. Yeah, I mean, do your fresh if you want. If you want to make fresh breadcrumbs, there's nothing hard about this. Just take bread. Could be stale bread. You can make it stale by just putting it in the oven, drying it out. All you're doing is taking moisture out of your bread to turn it stale. Then you can run it in a food processor. If you don't have that, you can chop it. You could put some plastic over it and take a meat mallet. And then you can season those breadcrumbs with whatever you want, or you can just buy a big container of Progresso or 4C breadcrumbs.
What do you think makes for a better meatball? Dried or like homemade? Like, when I say dried, I mean store-bought.
I think what people would say would make a better meatball would be, forget about the breadcrumbs, just take bread. So just take bread, squeeze it, you know, run it through water or put some milk in it, squeeze it out. Then you're getting like then you mash that with the meat and you're like basically making like a panade almost, you know. Normally you wouldn't even put it with the meat straight away. You would make and I think panade is the word. It's a French. You would mash the bread along with all your other ingredients, your cheese, your herbs, your garlic. And then once you're happy with that, the consistency of it, then you would mix that into the meat. That's how you would do it.
I feel like meatballs are a really good way to engage, you know, if you have kids or youngsters in your life, not your own children necessarily, but because it's something that's easy for them to do.
It's easy
and it's fun,
and they'll get pretty good results. You know,
yeah.
Like you can say like we're gonna make 50 meatballs today. Do it with your like 10-year-old, and then you can have them all week. So like one night you'll have like it with pasta. Another night you'll do meatball heroes. Another night maybe you can just chop them up, turn it into a baked pasta, lasagna. There's a lot of things. You could put them in pizza dough, which is one of the best things to do. I know.
Pizza dough?
So you do a roll. So what's in New York, what is called like a chicken roll or a sausage roll.
Oh, okay.
So what you do is you take slices of those meatballs. So you take this is what normally what pizzerias do. They'll make their meatballs a little larger, and then they'll let them get cold. And when they're cold, that's when you can slice them.
Yes.
So you make a slice about a half an inch to an inch thick, and then you do your pizza roll, which we've done a few of them on the site, but there's no video yet. Now, this is something I would be mad if somebody steals from me, which I'm saying it now, I'm giving it away.
Yeah.
So they call them rolls, or I guess like you could say like a stromboli kind of.
Yeah. You actually just made me think of, because when you started talking about pizza, I thought you meant as a topping on pizza. And meatballs are one of my favorite toppings for pizza. I'm normally not into like the pepperoni or the sausage on pizza, but give me slices of meatballs on a pizza any day.
That sounds delicious, but
happy.
I like pepperoni too. And what do we have coming up?
We already filmed the frozen pepperoni pizza taste test.
So the other pizza taste test was very popular. So a lot of people were saying, you didn't do this brand, you didn't do that brand, you should have done that brand. So the brands that are going to be in the pepperoni pizza taste test are most of those brands you guys mentioned.
Yeah. And actually, one of the brands that was mentioned, can I say it?
Yeah.
Motor City.
Yeah.
So that was one of the ones that we got the most comments on. So I had to get that one. The only Motor City pizza I could find was a pepperoni pizza. So that actually drove the whole rest of the video, because I had to compare apples to apples, because I know
that was another
criticism of the previous one, which, again, nothing scientific here that we're doing with the taste tests, but I wanted to make sure that we were in fact comparing apples to apples this time around. So getting the Motor City pepperoni pizza was what drove me getting all of the other frozen pepperoni pizzas.
Go watch the video, guys. But I will tell you, the pepperoni pizza taste test was a lot better. I felt like the quality of the pizzas was better than in the first taste test. Or my mouth could have been like, I lost my ability to tell the difference after a while with all that pepperoni.
Yeah. But there were a lot of pepperoni like flavor that was different from the other. Like one was like kind of gamey, another one was kind of artificial, another one.
I had a taco last night that was so gamey from Chipotle. James couldn't eat. He had 2 tacos left, which is amazing in itself that he couldn't finish his dinner. He gets 2 meals now.
Well, he finished the first meal.
Yeah. But like I was like, all right, I'm taking a bite of this taco. I took it. It was like the most barnyard thing I've ever eaten in my life.
Yeah.
I was like, what's going on here?
I thought it was good, but it was a little barnyardy. Yeah.
That's why he didn't want to finish it. So, I mean, whatever. You're right.
Before we move into our listener submitted questions, do you have any final thoughts on meatballs? Speak now or forever hold your meatball.
So I didn't mention my brother worked at a place called Meatball, and they made like
meatball
dozens of different meatballs. It's in Patchogue, Long Island. He no longer works here anymore. So you can make a lot of different types of meatballs. I would say just experiment and do whatever feels right to you. I would definitely not get held up on, and you'll know there's a commonality of everything we say. There's no 100% right way to do it. Nobody has the ultimate meatball recipe that they're hoarding and everything else is good. There is so many ways to make a good meatball. But yeah, if you use like a high fat beef, if you don't really overmix it, if you put a little bit of moisture in there, a lot of flavor, use the Pecorino Romano, use that cheese to your advantage, and put it in a good sauce, and then you'll be fine.
Yeah, it really is that simple.
Yeah.
And have fun when you're doing it.
Yeah, have fun.
Right?
it could be a little stiff, guys. Your meatballs don't have to be ultra tender. Everybody's like, oh, these are the most tender meatballs ever. Sometimes you don't want a tender meatball. I used to, when I went to high school, or not like middle school or high school, because we always had the Sunday sauce with my mother's and my grandmother's meatballs were very tender, but the sauce they would serve in the cafeteria, which again, I was never allowed to have jarred sauce in my life and never had like a fake meatball. So when I went there and I had my first fake meatball and jarred sauce, I'm telling you, these meatballs, they were like a paradigm shift to me. They were like a handball. Like they would, you could bounce these things, you could throw them at somebody, they wouldn't come apart. So yeah, they were overmixed too, and I enjoyed them too because it was so different.
All right, well, let's move into some of the questions that we have, and the first question is actually for me.
I feel like I should be reading this.
So I don't know if you can.
Let me see it.
Well, it's just I'll read it.
Okay.
I mean, these are my notes, so I don't know if you're gonna be able to decipher, my shorthand. But the question is Tara Italian? So people want to know if I have Italian blood or whatnot. So the answer is a little bit. I, like so many Long Islanders or people in New York or people in the United States in general, am a mix of Europe. So where I get my Italian blood from is my dad's side, my dad's grandma. My dad's mom, my grandma. She was 100% Italian, Sicilian specifically. Her family was from Caltabellotta in Sicily. And
What was the name?
What was her name?
Yeah.
Her name was Jane, but she shortened it because it was Giaconina.
What was the maiden? The
Gallo.
Gallo. Yeah.
Gallo. Yeah.
Yeah.
So she sadly passed away when I was in second grade. So I must have been 7 years old at the time. But, my memories of her really center around food.
Yeah.
Which is interesting. One of the authors I really like, his name is Mike Viking, or Viking, depending on, I guess, how he pronounces it. He has a book called The Art of Making Memories, and he talks a lot about the importance of food and smell in shaping memories. In fact, if you are having a moment that you want to remember forever, you should take a whiff of something. Like he talks about being on the beach with his dad, and he wanted to remember it. So he picked up a pile of seaweed and he brought it to his nose and just took a big whiff because he wanted to remember that moment. And he knows that in the future, if he smells seaweed, he's going to be brought right back to that moment. The memories I have of my grandma really are about food. And specifically, which I think ties in really perfectly with this episode, is I remember her meatballs. And they were like nothing I've ever had. They were so good. I was still able to eat meat at the time because, like I said in the previous episode, my mom switched us to vegetarianism when I was 8. But that was, this was before that. And her meatballs were outstanding. She also made a salad that I loved. I don't even know what her salad dressing was. Probably so basic. I think it was like red wine vinegar, like Regina red wine vinegar, and probably not even extra virgin olive oil. It was probably just olive oil, or maybe even some other type of oil.
It might have been vegetable oil.
I know.
It could have been. A lot of people would do that.
It could have been. Yep. Yeah. But I remember that. And yeah, I mean, she actually was the one who taught my mom, who my mom doesn't have a drop of Italian blood in her. My grandma taught my mom how to cook, how to make sauce. So whenever my mom would make sauce when I was a kid, it was basically like my grandma's recipe. And in fact, Jim, the rolling pin that you use in so many of our recipes and that we have pictured is my grandma's rolling pin. I love that rolling pin. I know. I'm sure she used to like give my dad and his brothers a bunch of whacks with the rolling pin.
That's an awesome rolling pin.
There were 4 boys.
If you haven't seen it, take a look at it because it's like It doesn't look like your typical rolling pin.
Yeah, it's like tapered on the ends.
Yeah.
But yeah, she and my grandpa, who was...
Oh, I'm sure she gave the whack to them.
she definitely did.
My grandmother used to chase me and my brother around with the wooden spoon. She used to hit us hard with it.
Yeah, there were 4 boys. My dad was the youngest. And yeah.
She used to like hit me right in the hand.
Yeah. Well, different time back then. Yeah. But my grandpa, who was not Italian, he was, Irish and Dutch, I believe. That's it. So.
Well, that's good. I'm glad you answered that question.
Yeah. Yeah. And thank you to people who were interested to hear a little bit about my background. Another question that came in was, have our kids expressed interest in learning to cook, or are they just happy to enjoy the fruits of our labor?
So it's a good
your labor, I should say.
It's a good question, and you cook. Tara does cook a lot. As far my stomach's growling. Just the honest truth is, James is not interested in cooking at all. So we get a lot of like comments, especially in the video, saying like you should do a video with James learning. He's not interested, guys, and so which is fairly typical of a kid his age.
He's shown more interest as of late. I don't mean to cut you off, but one day he said he wanted to cook something with me, and we made broccoli rabe and sausage and orecchiette.
That was good. I actually remember when you guys made it.
And he wanted to do the chopping, so I taught him how to, remove the skin from the garlic. He cut the garlic. He sauteed it. He did all of the stuff with the broccoli rabe. So he did have interest in that, but I think that was the last time he was.
I think he had interest because the payoff was going to be one of his favorite pasta dishes.
That's right. But yeah, I mean, he's less interested in cooking than he is in eating. He's very interested in eating.
He is so interested in eating. So that's James. Sammy, our daughter, who was in the older videos, she's the cutest. Now she's really tall.
She's almost taller than you.
Strong teen right now, and she used to cook more when she was younger, probably when she was towards that 10, 11 year age, and she stopped. She doesn't do it as much now. So we hope, honestly, my hope would be that she would come in the videos because she's actually a pretty good cook already.
She is.
She could do a lot of stuff.
Yeah, she's a great baker.
She does a lot of baking.
Mean, she was in the episode 2 where we talked about the picky eaters, and I think we talked about briefly about her interest in baking. She used to, when she was a little bit younger, everything was Rosanna Pansino or Zumbo, or she was like very into all the different desserts. She's made quite a few like really impressive desserts. Remember she made that Legend of Zelda cake for James's birthday one year?
That was awesome. And she also did that unicorn.
The unicorn cake? Yeah.
So hopefully she'll get involved, I think. I mean, God, we are the perfect family for our kids to follow in our footsteps. We got a podcast studio up here. We got a kitchen studio downstairs. I mean, God, you could set up your YouTube channel and your whole business really easily.
Yeah, turnkey.
We should rent space here. Yeah. But listen, guys, we really appreciate you tuning in to this latest episode. And please send more questions
to
podcast@sipandfeast.com. We'll see you next time.